Hello and welcome to Africafé, the broadcast that talks about African organization and issues. Today we're going to talk about post-COVID economic recoveries within the South African development community. But before that, let's look at this issue.
The Southern African Development Community, or SADC, is an intergovernmental organization headquartered in Gaborone, Botswana. The adoption by 9 majority-ruled Southern African countries of the Lusaka Declaration on April 1, 1980, paved the way for the formal establishment of the SADC in April 1980. The SADC has 27 legally binding protocols dealing with issues such as defense, development, illicit drug trade, free trade, and movement of people. Some of these protocols include Protocol on Energy, which is intended to promote harmonious development of national energy policies. Protocol on Gender and Development, aimed at accelerating the implementation efforts towards the achievements of concrete and transformative changes in the lives of women and girls in the region. Protocol on Politics, Defense and Security Cooperation, intended to foster regional security and defense cooperation, promote peace, political stability, and conflict management. The organization has 6 principal bodies: the Summit, comprising heads of state or heads of government, Organ on Politics, Defense and Security, Council of Ministers, the SADC Tribunal, the SADC National Committees, and the Secretariat.
So Kelly, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today in Morocco. It's a pleasure to talk to you also, and today I want to talk to you about the South African Development Community, which you are part of as a Kenyan citizen. I want to talk about post-COVID recovery. In the regional level, what has the SADC, the South African Development Community, done to boost post-COVID economic recovery in the region?
Thank you, Yusuf, for having me. And maybe as a slight point of correction, Kenya is actually not part of the SADC region.
Yeah.
The SADC region comprises of now Southern African countries.
Okay.
And we find that Tanzania is the only East African country that's part of the SADC region, which is quite interesting. Now, as to what the SADC community has done in terms of post-COVID economic recovery, I think the discussions should start from how the pandemic economically impacted the SADC region.
Yes.
Now, we find that at a continental level, there was an economic contraction of 2.1%, just based on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this umbrella figure covers some, or at least disguises some nuances. And one of these nuances is that, in fact, for the Southern African region, there was an economic contraction of 7%. So when we consider this massive economic contraction, we see that the Southern African region was the most heavily impacted region on the continent, and one of the most heavily impacted regions globally by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we also have to consider some of the factors that resulted in the economic contraction. So now, as you may recall, the COVID-19 pandemic was characterized by lockdown measures.
Yes.
What this means for developing and least developed countries is that economic activity is stifled and people can't carry out their usual economic activities.
Yeah.
There is not sufficient penetration of the digital economy. So with the lockdown measures came significant economic contraction. Now, what has the SADC region done in terms of economic recovery? Well, to my mind, the post-pandemic recovery we can't directly attribute it to the SADC community alone. We have to look at it in an all-inclusive manner. And one of the reasons I say this is because as recently as 29th September 2022, the Africa Development Bank recently disbursed a loan to Angola.
What's this Africa Development Plan? Was the SADC that launched this development plan?
No. So the bank is a separate entity, and that's why I say we have to also consider the external actors in terms of the economic recovery, because the SADC region hasn't been able to come out of the economic recovery of the COVID-19 pandemic alone. As with other regions in the world, it had to seek external support. And some of the factors that have factored into what it's done in line with economic recovery is we look at external actors such as the Africa Development Bank, we look at actors such as the European Central Bank, we look at joint initiatives such as the COVAX vaccine program. And if you'll allow me to just go through all three of these and what they've done.
Of course, that was actually my next question.
Yeah.
And thank you for correcting me. I always thought that Kenya was part of the SADC, but Kenya is more like East Africa, I think.
Yes.
But that region in general has suffered from COVID-19 quite acutely.
Yes.
You're telling me that there is things happening on the ground, and I want you to elaborate on that. What is going on in terms of initiatives and in terms of day-to-day activities of regional institutions or external actors to make that region go forward economically?
I see. So you find that a lot of the trade in the Eastern African region and the Southern African region is at a small scale. So when we think about what initiatives are being put in place to at least promote economic recovery, we have to think of trade facilitation measures. So for the SADC region, one of the trade facilitation measures we can discuss is the Smart Corridor Initiative. So what this is that it's a system that automates the monitoring of truck drivers, the monitoring of traders as they cross borders. So once you're cleared in your country of origin, you don't have to be cleared at numerous border posts, you know. And if you were to also borrow from now my region, the East African community, you find that there's also smart border posts, not one-stop border posts. So the one-stop border posts also facilitate the kind of movement of traders across the borders. So that's very important when we think of economic recovery at a micro level, because again, a lot of the economic activity in Africa is at a small scale.
So yeah, it's important to bolster free trade and free movement and to scale up the economies of all those countries by liberalizing all the trade barriers and have a more free-flowing economies between the different nations of the region. I think that's what you're saying. And the Smart Corridors initiative, it reminds me a bit of the Belt and Road initiative and how it's important to build logistical checkpoints and logistical railways and routes between African countries to bolster the economy. But I think that's another topic. So my last question is you as a researcher, as an expert, what would be your recommendations to the SADC, but also to the African continent decision makers and academics to further enhance this economic recovery post-COVID, especially if you could put an emphasis on what the regional institutions and like the regional and continental institution such as the SADC and the African Union can do today to help nations recover.
I don't think I could have gotten better guidance, and let me borrow some of your words on the importance of free trade. Now, what the regional economic communities can do, leave alone SADC alone, is lean into the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. That's what we need to do at a continental level.
Yeah.
We need to implement the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And what's this? What's AFTA, as I call it? It's the largest free trade area in the world.
Yeah, the ASFTA, yeah.
Yes, it brings together 54 African countries. And the reason it's so important for the question that you're asking is because it will liberalize trade across all these African countries. Now, a fun fact, about 80% of trade by African countries is actually with external parties.
Yeah.
It's not intra-African trade, which is crazy.
Yes.
And
the potential is tremendous within Africa and between African countries.
Exactly. And to now steer back to the SADC community, you find that there's an AFTA pilot scheme that has now initiated the trade between African countries. And 2 of the SADC member states are involved in the pilot scheme. This is Mauritius and Tanzania.
Okay.
And what this means is that trade under the AFTA has started, and what the communities, what the regional economic communities which have been envisioned as building blocks for the AFTA can do is to just implement at a regional level and then implement at a national level. I think that's the best way we can move forward.
That was quite synthetic and straight to the point, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with this broadcast. So I think our viewers quite understand that when we're talking about post-economic recovery, we're talking, and what regional institution can do is basically promote free trade between African countries. That's the basis. And second, there's this issue of financing and finding more money and more initiatives like the Smart Corridors initiative to make the intentions more concrete.
You've got it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you, Yusuf.
To know more, you can consult our website, policycenter.ma, and see you soon for the next episode of Africafé.